afternoon. I'm Jordan Roth, and thank you for joining us for the DALLÄSTHETIC podcast, number 22. And with me today, I have Leslie Moody Castro and Angel Cabrales. Thank you all for joining. Leslie is a curator who's in town and doing some prep work for the Vignette Art Fair, which will take place in April, and we'll be talking about that in a minute. And then Angel is in town for his exhibition, It Came From Beyond the Border 3, Tender Care Detention. And you saw a little glimpse of that a moment ago, although it's a different kind of dramatic when you're there in person. And that exhibition opens at Road to Art's downtown pop-up on Saturday evening at 1508 Commerce Street. So, where do we start?
It's at the beginning.
So much has happened.
Yeah, so much has happened.
Here.
So this is the exhibition poster for It Came From Beyond the Border. This is part of a three-part series so far, I guess.
So far.
Where
issues keep coming. So
yeah, kind of tell us.
Crazy, right?
Give us like the background of like what is it that came from beyond the border?
Well, a big part of it has been really playing off of how much migrants are being dehumanized, and the term illegal alien is thrown about, and pretty much talking about how they're pretty much trash. So I came out with trying to really play off the words, and since I'm a big sci-fi nerd, making a discussion about it using sci-fi. I like calling it a tequila sci-fi mexploitation version of it.
Nice.
So I made B-movie posters and then started playing with it. And then things keep happening, issues keep popping up. So I ended up taking it to Arizona when they started having issues there. And then, of course, what happened close to my hometown in El Paso, outside in Tornillo, with the detention centers. So it just keeps rolling. And I thought this was one of the easier ways for people to intake the issue, to create a discussion, because a lot of people try to ignore what happens.
And so you get to be kind of visceral in a way, but at the same time you're adding technology and lights and sounds and kind of making it fun and interactive.
Right.
But then you step back afterwards and go, whoa,
Well, a big part of it is I want things that you can identify with, things that you know and associate with. I want you to have a little bit of fun, and then I want you to feel bad for having that fun, because I want you to really realize what's going on. So.
It's effective. We were working on the installation last night, and what you see behind us is the Tender Care Detention. And it took quite an effort to get that through a doorway, but it worked. And once it was brought into the gallery, some of the models of the children were brought into it. And there was something that viewers will see that I think will stick with them. Something that kind of just stuck with me personally was just the gravity of like babies behind fences,
right,
wrapped in those blankets. And so I made that little video at the beginning to just kind of have like this low-key version of horror, different than what you'll see, at the show. But that really, kind of stuck with me. Other elements, that are included in the show that are like super topical are, Border Patrol agents, and there's a wall. I mean, Angel has built the wall. It does run east-west, but at the checkpoint at our reception desk, we'll do our best and protect our neighbors from our neighbors.
Can't wait to see it.
Yeah, it's quite something. Now I want to talk about some of the work that you've done over the years. So you live in Texas and Mexico.
Yes.
And kind of mostly in Mexico, or? Sure. Okay. And what brought you to Mexico initially?
I actually studied Latin American contemporary for undergrad. And so when I graduated from undergrad, I just kind of knew that I needed to be in a Latin American city center. And so the most accessible at the time, this was in 2004, flights weren't as attainable, as easy, or even as affordable in Latin America then. Mexico City seemed like the closest Latin American city center that was also not terribly far away from my family.
Yeah.
And so I just picked up and moved from Chicago, where I was doing undergrad at the time at DePaul University, and moved to Mexico with the plan of only kind of living there for 6 months.
Wow.
And that did not work. I still live there. I'll have my 15-year anniversary, my 15-year Mexiversary.
Wow, that's so cool.
August
That's awesome.
7th. Yeah, isn't that
Is there
crazy?
going to be a celebration?
There's going to be a lot of tequila. Yes, there will be a celebration.
August 7th. I need to put that on my
August 7th is
calendar.
August
my
7th.
birthday. That's why I
Oh.
was like, is there going to be a celebration?
You should come visit.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's how I ended up in Mexico.
That's terrific.
Yeah.
And what did you get your master's in?
I did my undergrad degree in art history and English, and then I did my master's degree in museum education with museum studies. So I actually was living and working in Mexico City, I think about 2 or 3 years, and then moved back to Austin to take a job at a museum there where I worked for about 6 months, and then got my master's degree at UT, or started my master's, and so stayed through my master's and became really embedded in the art scene in Austin.
Cool.
And the entire time I was kind of bouncing back and forth between the two cities, between Austin and Mexico City, and so I never really left my base there. And then in 2011, I moved back full time to Mexico City and took an art break. Actually, I took 6 months off. I didn't see any art at
cool.
all.
Wow. I can't imagine.
I know. Isn't
Like,
that crazy?
what?
Crazy.
What do you do?
I read books.
I'm kind of like, how do you do that?
It's really hard.
I don't understand.
It's really hard. Yeah, I read a lot of books. I taught English, which was really fun.
Oh, cool.
And then slowly started getting back into the art world through writing. So I was being asked to like write reviews and write about the art world in Mexico City, and so I started doing that more and more and more. And then as the writing kind of came along more and more, the projects came along more and more. And then I decided to finally start looking for jobs, which I didn't get any of the jobs that I had applied for, which was also good. And so it just ended up happening that I was getting more and more freelance work and more sort of independent curatorial work. So I just kind of decided to focus on that.
And you've done like art fairs and biennials and
I did one biennial.
one biennial.
I did one. There was only one,
Okay,
for
so
the record.
It's not the future.
But it was a
yet.
good one.
It's not
Okay.
the future yet.
So,
We'll see if that ever happens.
but you did the Texas biennial
I
a couple
did.
years ago.
Yeah,
and that
2017.
That was a really amazing experience, I'm sure.
It was great. That was where I first met Angel.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
And you visited 30-something cities?
32, I think. 32
Wow.
or 34.
That's amazing. And then ended up with 33 artists.
33
right?
artists, yeah.
But visited how many?
200.
Oh my gosh. And you spent time with each artist.
Yeah, I mean, our studio visit was at least an hour.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that each of the visits was at least an hour, and it really depended on like where I was. That was kind of determined how long I could spend in the studio, because if I was in Dallas or Houston or the bigger cities and I had to fit in, 7 artists in a day, then we really only had an hour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what's a biennial for those who don't know?
It is they're all different, but it's
Yeah.
basically an exhibition that happens every 2 years. And this biennial, the Texas Biennial, is meant to kind of take a survey and a temperature of the art scene and work being produced in Texas every 2 years. And that's how I was looking at it as well. And so I traveled throughout the entire state of Texas, and I did studio visits with 200 artists. We ended up doing, I think we traveled like 10,000 miles in the course of 7.5 weeks. Yeah, it was a
It was
lot.
fun following
was-
you on Instagram and your adventures
It was crazy how it grew.
Yeah.
and the
'Cause
many visits to Dairy Queen.
there were so. It's not a Texas road trip about Buc-ee's and Dairy Queen.
I need my Blizzard.
It was very. I needed the chicken strips and the great. Yeah, it was. It was a really amazing trip, and like I hadn't really spent time in West Texas before, and so to spend time out in Marfa and like to really see the entire state was crazy. It was really fun.
And I saw you documented all of the visits too,
Yeah.
which is really fantastic.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure it was the process was as transparent as possible, and so I did a lot of writing about all the visits. I documented the entire itinerary. I made it public. It's not only on my website, but it's also on the Texas Biennial website, and it's published in print in our catalog. So every artist that I visited is there. We also had 1,217 submissions, which I read every single one of them.
Wow.
I shortlisted 300 artists, but only visited 200 artists. There were a few of the artists in the exhibition, the final exhibition, I didn't visit with, but I was very much in touch with. And so it was a lot. It was a lot. It was really, really, really fun. And the Instagram or social media stuff was really interesting because I think when it started, no one thought I could pull it off. And I didn't think I could pull it off either. But as people like really saw that I was serious about doing this thing and really going to all these places in Texas and doing studio visits to build this exhibition, I think the social media stuff kind of started snowballing, in a way. And so more and more people were following it as I was going along.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, it was like I got to Lubbock and I felt like I already had friends there when I'd never even been before.
That's
It
cool.
was really cool. Yeah.
And what was Angel doing when you met up with him?
What was I doing?
What were you doing? I saw
I
the
just
ice
finished the truck.
Yes, you
I
just
had just
finished
finished
the
the
truck.
truck.
You were doing the
Oh, I was doing the neon
the
gun.
neon lights.
Yes, the neon 225 and counting.
Yes.
That's what I was doing.
And you were also working a little bit on the playscape. I think you were going to do like one more.
The helicopter.
The helicopter, yes.
Yeah.
So
That's what he was doing.
cool. Well, both the ambulance. It was an ambulance, perhaps. The van and the helicopter will be in this show, and
excited to
and
see
that
it.
gun we'll have an image of in a bit too.
Yeah.
Really visceral piece.
Very, very visceral piece. Yeah, I'm really excited to see the show.
Thanks.
So, and then next you're doing Vignette.
I'm doing Texas Vignettes.
And
Yeah.
Vignette is a really important fair and an interesting, ambitious project as well. I guess they're in their third year?
This will be the third edition.
Okay. And what do you know about, or tell us a little bit about Vignette? I know you know a lot about it.
Well, it is also an open call, which is really cool. And I'm very excited about kind of growing it into what it can be for as a foundation for like networking for women artists in the state as well. It's still a baby. It's still kind of finding its footing, which is really exciting. And it's exciting to be part of it from this phase, I think. I'm also very excited about the fact that it's in the Texas Women's Building in Fair Park, which is a building that is incredibly underutilized and a space or place that's really underutilized. And for me, that building has been, it's a building I've been wanting to work in since I first started coming to Dallas.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
It's amazing, and the history is incredible. When we first met, I was doing that residency at Central Track, and so Fair Park was kind of my backyard.
Yeah.
And I spent a lot of time there and did my best to learn a lot about the history of the park, did multiple tours with people that worked there. Actually, the first time I went to Fair Park, I was plucked out of the fountain.
What?
It was really hot. It was a really hot day, and there was this giant fountain there, and it was so beautiful
course
and
I'm
inviting.
going,
So I
yeah.
took my shoes off, and I started wading in the fountain. As you do. I also got kicked out of the Fort Worth Modern once for doing that.
Oh, wow.
When I
Yeah.
was at Arizona State, I'd walk through their fountains as I
It's
go to
just-
class, so I
mean, You
understand.
have to do these things, right? So yes, I was able, because I got, so the manager of Fair Park at the time, like came by on the golf cart and he's like, you're not supposed to do that. And I was like, oh, really? Okay. So he like flex me out. And then he's like, what are you doing here? And we started talking, and he ended up giving me a full tour of the entire
oh, wow.
park. I ended up like being able to like, we actually took the golf cart onto the Cotton Bowl field.
Nice.
Like it was really cool. So always take your shoes off. in a
Yeah,
fountain.
you never know what will happen.
You
if
never
take your
know what
shoes
will
off.
happen.
It's a great way to
Good
meet people.
advice.
It's a really good way to meet people. But back to Vignette. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's a little tangential there.
Oh, no, that's fine. We do that.
We do that. Yeah, so it's open call, submission based, and I'm really, really excited to see what we get. I've been sort of refreshing our submittable every day to see who applies. I'm really excited to get to know more artists in the area and just to work with this like really amazing team of women.
Yeah.
That's something that's really exciting for me right now.
And so what are the guidelines for submission?
There really aren't any.
Well, you have to be a woman, right?
That's one guideline.
Okay.
Yes, you have to be a woman or female identifying.
Okay.
It is a application fee of $45,
Mm-hmm.
but it also buys you a membership to Vignettes, and
Oh, nice.
we're building their membership program. That's one of the things that we're talking about how that can continue in the future and become really strong.
Cool.
Yeah.
And so there's no like age limit or anything like that?
Nope.
Great.
Yeah.
Well-
And we'll see what we get. And really the submissions will determine how the exhibition fleshes out. So I
Yeah.
actually have no idea what it's going to look like.
And do they go to the Vignette website to submit?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Vignette.
Texas Vignette.
Texas Vignette, Google it, and you'll find it. And
We're good at this.
yeah, and that's where you can submit your
Google.
application at the Google.
At the Google.
So one thing I'm
my God,
curious
that's
about
me.
is that there you are, yeah. So that's the Vignette website, and I would guess that they would go to Call for Artists.
Yes, Call for Artists.
So one thing I'm curious about, and I don't know the answer, but we have a border crisis apparently.
Oh my God, the war that's there every day, then I live there.
Well, I mean, but then again, it is a humanitarian crisis.
Yes.
Yes,
There's no
that it is,
question.
yes, yes.
I would say it's a crisis of morality.
Different kind of crisis than what we're told it is.
Yeah.
Yes.
What in Mexico? What's the perception of what's going on up there?
People just think it's crazy. It's crazy, and it's affected us on so many levels. So we just had a regime change in the government in Mexico, and so things are going to start fleshing out a little bit in terms of the cultural sector and politically as well. But I also help to run a residency program in Austin, and we bring artists in from the entire country of Mexico 4 times a year. And the artist that we invited to come for the month of January was detained for 3 hours. He was detained for 3 hours. They threatened to deport him, arrest him, and get rid of his visa, like cancel his visa completely so he can never come back to the States. He's had his visa most of his life. There was a misunderstanding about the word work. And because the immigration officer didn't understand the word work, like he's producing work, not
Like
coming for a
artwork.
job. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
It just kind of exacerbated the situation. And yeah, ultimately he was let through into the country, but we had to contest it with the Mexican consul because they were only going to give him a week. And so the Mexican consul sort of saw it as a humanitarian issue, got involved, and we were able to have him here the entire month to be able to produce the artwork that he was going to make during his residency.
Yeah.
Meanwhile,
Wow.
yeah, isn't it crazy? So meanwhile, while this is happening, the immigration officer became more and more upset, and now the artist has to go to the U.S. Embassy in Mexico to work something out with his visa. And apparently the director of the residency and the residency itself has been put on a list as a threat to America for corroborating with foreign entities, which is insane.
Wow.
Yeah, it's insane. And we have all of our ducks in a row. Everything is fine. It's just one of these things where it's like, how is collaborating culturally between 2 countries this impossible?
But is there any collusion?
Especially when it's your neighbor.
Sorry.
Right, especially when it's your neighbor. Right.
Corroborating with foreign entities? Uh-huh. Isn't that what we do as an international society?
Basically.
Isn't that
But
what
it's
we do
usually
at
called-
every border city?
Yeah.
It's usually called collaboration.
Collaboration. Yeah, not corroborate.
Not
Corroboration is a unique one.
Yeah, and so it's really one of these things. It's like it's affecting us on every level, but the perception of what's happening physically on the border is very different because
Yeah.
obviously there's not a war.
There's not a war, and it just, when they're talking about it's like this crisis, we need to put this wall up. It's like, well, one, we have a very meaty looking fence, and the wall that you're putting up, I don't know if you saw, they actually tested how fast they can cut through it, and they can cut through it a lot faster.
I saw that. It's great. Yeah.
And it's just a waste of money when you could actually be spending that money to actually help the people that need to get in here. And if you're so much about securing the border, then that wall isn't the way to do it.
No, there's just the media plays off this sense of urgency that doesn't really exist. And I think that
Like you could build it right away anyway.
It's like that's, yeah.
We're not going to do
not
any
a pop-up
surveys of the
wall.
land. We're just going to throw this thing up there.
And that scares me too. It's like, what are they doing geologically? What are they doing to the
Well,
landscape?
not only that, but
with it?
all the property that's owned by
Private.
Right.
private
Yeah.
owners. It's eminent domain. We're just going
Right.
to take your land.
Right.
So and there's
on a
cases.
whim,
There's
basically.
cases where I think it's in South Texas, where the lady's house now has a fence, and she's still in the U.S., but it's on the Mexican side of the fence now. You know, so they had to build her a gate so that she can go through.
They built her a gate.
Yeah, because
Wow.
she had to go through.
And I think there's a butterfly preserve that's in danger.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's down in Brownsville.
Yeah, that's down in Brownsville.
It's
It's
Well,
insane.
well,
It's
down
really
down
insane.
in Phoenix, they when Bush was president, they built a fence through an arroyo, and a bunch of environmentalists said you can't build it here. It's an arroyo, and they're like, well, it's dry. It's like, well, it's dry now. Come
rains.
July, it will not be dry, and $5 million worth of fence washed down
It's
into Mexico.
just like-
Hey, free steel.
Oh, wow.
I mean, there is so little forward thinking and like productive thinking that is happening behind all of this, and that's beyond frustrating. And this is like this is not a solution by any means.
No. And you have students that live in Mexico, correct?
Yes.
What are they able to get to and from pretty easily?
They have a permit, and then they have a fast track to cross over. However, UTEP used to have, I think it was 19% Mexican students. Now we have 4%.
What?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So it dropped drastically.
Because it's so hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, people are afraid, but like I have a student that lives deep in Juarez. She's an hour in. It takes her an hour from Juarez to get to the bridge.
Wow.
You know, and then she
It's a drive.
and then she has to drive over the bridge, and she takes the Zaragoza one, which is like on the far end of East El Paso, which is
Yeah.
another hour to the university. So I think she wakes up at like 5 in the morning to get to
God.
class.
That is a serious. I think that's really. I mean, it's commendable as well because it shows like the serious commitment that she has to her education, and that is another thing that is like is being hindered here is this sharing of resources, sharing of knowledge, collaborating.
Yeah.
Not to mention like how it affects people in their daily lives in a very, very real way. And we're just talking about it in terms of our art world.
Actually, I thought about it. She was actually in the first vignette.
Really?
Yes, she was.
She was what?
She's in the first vignette.
Oh, how
Yeah.
cool.
I want to meet her.
I told her to apply again. So.
Okay, good. Send me her name.
Wow, that's something. So this edition of It Came From Beyond the Border is Tender Care Edition. Or it's Tender Care Detention.
Yes.
I've been there, but not quite the same one. Anyway. What prompted you to, well, we know,
Well, I mean, I
Why,
live in El
but-
Paso.
yeah.
You know, growing up in El Paso, well, outside of El Paso, I lived in Anthony, New Mexico, but went to school in El Paso. We had 3 acres of land, and growing up, we would always see migrants coming through. We would always give them a job really quick. My mom would pack them up food. We'd pay them, and you know.
Because you have a restaurant. You have a family
Well,
restaurant.
now we do, but
Okay.
then we didn't.
Okay.
My dad was an engineer, but we were always taught to help people, you know, because you don't know their situation, you know, and especially if somebody's trying to better themselves, why would you hinder that? It's better to help them. You know, you want to help people to better themselves, and so I always grew up with that. With my parents helping people, migrants coming through, helping the homeless, you know, they were big volunteers in the church. I was even an altar boy. And so we were constantly helping. And so that really made an impact on me. And then we see what's going on now, and you see all of these families that are so at this point in their life where they're so desperate that some of them even send their kids by themselves, because even that risk to send them by themselves is better than the life that they're living. You know, how can we turn people away, you know, when they're that desperate? You know, we're supposed to be like this country of morals, you know, and being humane, and yet all of a sudden they're being dehumanized, like they're less than human.
And then to jump in here too, a lot of people have a misunderstanding of what this sort of life, what it's caused by, and like the drug trade along the border has in the trafficking, et cetera, has really happened because of U.S. demand.
Right.
This is not like a problem
Exactly.
that was exacerbated by Mexico. This was a problem that was exacerbated by the States, and the United States does not take responsibility for that by any means. And so it's one of those situations where it's like people don't necessarily understand why life is so hard in some areas in Mexico and the border. And it's like, well, there's all these foreign entities that are involved that are shaping lifestyles of people. Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you.
That's okay.
And they're basically all populations of people are just in the way of like this massive like machine of drug trade.
Yeah. Or yeah,
I mean, without that
things-
demand, that wouldn't
Yeah.
be there.
Yeah.
You know, you take away the demand, then you would take away the drug trade, you know,
Right.
the human trafficking, because then no one wants it. Where do you go from there?
It's a very complicated issue. Like we're making it simple.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
And then we wouldn't have people throwing 70-pound bags of pot over the fence like our president thinks they do.
What?
He said that a couple of years ago.
70-pound bags.
What?
There's an art piece I want to make about that, but eventually I'll get to it.
Like, I mean, all the like idiotic,
Yeah.
like fuckery that this guy
That's why you
just
have
like
to
comes
have the
out
wall.
with.
That's why you have to have the wall see-through so that
Yeah.
they can see the bag coming over,
Oh my
so that they can
God.
avoid it.
Or catch it.
Or catch it. You know?
Because no one's gonna avoid that 70-pound bag. What are you talking about? Oh my God.
So we've got some images of some of your previous work, and then a few. So this actually here, starting here, this is something you did last year? Or was
Yes.
it okay.
Was it last year?
I think it was last year at the MAC.
Well,
Yeah,
no, it
that
was 2017.
Okay,
'cause
2017.
Yes,
Yeah, I had
yes.
seen the remnants of this when I was in town for the road trip.
Yes.
So this,
And that
what's
was actually in a variation of that ended up in the Transborder Biennial.
and it's called A Hole in One.
A hole in one.
Yeah. And so kind of a play on our president's golfing habits and then meddling in other countries' business.
Yes. It was, yes, commentary on our 45th president. Each country had a title, which was a quote from our president. And it was pretty much talking about like how we impose our will across the world,
Yeah.
as well as, and I did have a red America and a blue America, and, you know, because it was trying to say that, you know, it's coming from both sides. You know,
Yeah.
it's not just like one side that's like, oh, I'm going to dominate and everything. However, I did tap down the blue gun, which a lot of people didn't know. It didn't fire as hard as the red gun.
So yeah, the participants sat in the chair there,
Right.
and you were there on the blue or the red side, and you had these guns that shot ping pong balls,
No, golf balls.
golf
Golf
balls,
balls.
and the blue guns were not as powerful.
They still fired, but
And this is a different gun. This is,
yes, this is
yeah.
225 and counting, and this was a commentary on all the shootings that we've had. It was titled 225 and counting because I finished it, I believe, on August 10th, which was the 221st day of the year. And on that day, there was already 225 mass shootings in the United States. And, you know, there was already more mass shootings than there were days in the year. And that's why I used an infinity mirror with the neon gun so that it just went on, oh, hey, there's my swing set.
There'll be a few different angles of this. So a couple of the images are from when it was at Clyde Warren Park during Aurora.
Yeah, and this is from the Transborder Biennial in 2013. So this was, of course, I lived in El Paso, and when we lived there, my grandma used to take us out to this little canyon that we would play at. And growing up, we'd always go out there. And when I was in graduate school, I went home to visit and realized, I was like, hey, you know what, I'm going to go to the canyon, and realized I couldn't get to it because there was now a a fence, that big meaty fence I was talking about. And I didn't realize at the time until then that when my grandma would take us to this canyon to play, it was actually in Mexico.
Oh, wow.
You know, so we would just walk right over and play. And so I started thinking about the comparisons of sister cities, you know, Juarez and El Paso, and how they work together and what their purposes were. And I started comparing them to playgrounds. You know, as kids, you know, that's how you meet new friends. You learn how to play with people, get along with people. And what I did was I then wrapped it in chain link, barbed wire, and lights in the name of security to protect your kids. And but it rendered it useless. It was no longer
heavy.
effective.
Yeah, it's heavy.
So each piece, had their own titles. Like that was the merry-go-round port of entry. That's the, I think that's the geodome detention.
Geodome detention.
Yeah.
They're still using that. I'm sorry.
And it's funny because I'm like, oh, look, I made more chain link artwork. It just keeps coming back.
It's it keeps coming back.
Yeah, it doesn't want to go away.
And I think that's interesting to say that, because the border zone is this like, it's a place that's neither here nor there. It operates in sort of its own language, context, its own bubble in many ways that is neither here nor there. And it's interesting to sit back and watch how people try and sort of penetrate it or change it or like work within its seamlessness.
Well, and that's how I feel like
it.
like right now, like I like calling it our own no man's land, because we're not Mexico and we're not really America, because we really like this whole other entity right in the middle.
Right.
And I feel like now we have people from our country that have never been here really trying to impose their will and redefine what we are without actually knowing what we actually are.
Right.
And we're like this, I like to say, this capirotada of culture along the border. We're just this giant mix.
And I think too that like every city along the border has its own identity and its own way of operating. Brownsville and Matamoros are extremely different from
Yes, they are.
Juarez, El Paso. Like very, very, very different.
I felt out of place when I was
Isn't
there.
it weird? Yeah, that's where my family's from.
So and I taught there for 2 years. So
Yeah, and then like Tijuana, San Diego is very, very different. Even like the rhetoric, the actual word that they use for the border is not a bridge; it's a line.
Oh, wow.
Because the Rio Grande doesn't cut through,
Oh,
and
yeah.
so they call it the La Línea. And so it took a while for me to adjust to that when I was there. So every city really does have its own identity, and it really is its own relationship to its sister city across whatever border. Yeah.
So it's just
So, I mean, we talk about in this podcast often, installation art and art that, has some type of a social context, it's activist art or it's social justice art or it's whatever. That's something that you've basically always been working with. Do you find, what does that do for you in terms of, being a citizen and
I just
a responsible adult or whatever?
as a responsible adult, I don't know if I
Anyone
can.
sitting at this table.
I'm like,
any of us talk about being a responsible
I don't know. I'm
adult
kind of a
here.
giant kid, so. But I want to be self-aware, and I want to be able to, because you look at society now and it's very, very polarized. So what I try to do with my art is try to hit people with things that they can identify with on whatever side they're on.
Yeah.
And associate with it, and then really think about what they're looking at, and then start a conversation with the person there, even if they don't agree with them. And it's really about creating dialogue and really getting people to think and converse with each other, even when, they would end up hating each other.
Yeah, because you get two
Empathy.
people with opposing views looking at the same thing,
Yeah.
forming opinions.
And
I
I've
think-
had that happen
Yeah.
many times.
I'm sure you
Happens
can.
all the time. Yeah.
I think empathy is a good, it's something I try to think about in my practice, not only to empathize with our conversations, dialogue, our sort of choir, if you will, but the opposing side as well, people that I wouldn't necessarily identify with. And if I'm empathetic to them, or if I try to think about being empathetic to conversations that I wouldn't necessarily be privy to
Yeah.
because of certain social situations. Is there a hook in any exhibition or project that I do that can bring them in and then start a productive conversation?
Right.
And that's really important to me too.
Yeah. I mean, art's one of the few things that enable us to engage in these types of conversations.
Or provoke them.
Or, yeah, definitely provoke them.
And that's the thing. It's like we have a society that really likes to ignore
Yeah.
like what's really happening. and not understand where it's coming from, like we were saying earlier. So this is my way of like going, okay, you know parts of this, and who doesn't like playing with toys, or who doesn't identify with, especially if you're older, those old metal swing sets and things like that. So it's like I'm gonna try to slap you with some nostalgia, you know, to bring you in, and then really think about the issues at hand.
Yeah.
So
We'll wrap this up pretty quick. So Angel, your show is this weekend, opens this weekend.
Yes.
It'll run for a month.
It's tomorrow?
Yes.
Yeah, Saturday night, which is tomorrow.
It's tomorrow.
Yeah. And it's at the Row 2 Art downtown pop-up on Commerce Street, just in the center of downtown. There's easy parking nearby. There's a parking lot. Oh, I'm not going to get into parking. It's easy. It's easy. There are garages. There are places
Just take
with
a
valets.
lift.
Take a lift. Take an Uber. And
Yes.
and just join us there. And you'll be in for quite a show.
sorry I didn't bring Pandulas this time.
And then we'll be scheduling an art talk for about a month from now. So there'll be information about the art talk for next month too. And-
Sorry, I just want to
oh, no,
say,
no.
audience, we did not know that this
Yeah.
was going to be live.
Yeah.
So we're cracking up over here.
I often don't tell people that it will be live. I just say, don't wear green. And they didn't.
We didn't.
So
It's a little bit of green.
a little bit of green. And then everyone that women artists pay attention to Vignette.
Please.
Open call is now. And
Until February 17th.
yeah.
I
see-
read every single submission.
Awesome, awesome. So we are going to close with a quick kind of a fun video of a project that you did at our gallery a few years ago.
Okay.
Operación Al Pastor.
Yes.
And this is where taco trucks, if they were on every corner, could
Yes.
also be weaponized.
I made 3 different factions. We had the Taco Rebels. We also had Dia de los Tacos, and the Tex-Mex, which
Yeah.
were more robotic. Well, they were mechs. And
Yeah,
which actually just showed at Texas Tech.
Awesome,
Nice.
awesome. Yeah, that show's traveled quite a bit.
Yay, Lubbock.
So
Yeah.
I got to do a talk there as well. So
So we'll play that, and then we're out of here for this week. Thanks for joining us. All right, bye.
Bye.